Jimmy Kimmel sat in his dressing room, holding a cup of coffee that had long since cooled. Outside the window, Los Angeles hummed with a buzz of evening life, the sounds of car horns mixed with the distant chatter of tourists on Hollywood Boulevard. In the ABC studio, preparations were underway for another episode of Jimmy Kimmel Live, and tonight's guest was special Sylvester Stallone, the action legend, whose new film about war veterans was expected to be a hit. But Jimmy felt uneasy. It all started with a phone call from the producer an hour before the show. "Jimmy, we have a problem." Carol's voice was tense. "Stallone's here, but he's not in the mood. He says he doesn't want to talk about the movie. Only politics. And he's already arguing with our writer in the hallway." Jimmy frowned. Politics? In 2025, that was a ticking time bomb. America was more divided than ever. Debates about veterans' social benefits, taxes for the rich, and immigrant rights filled the airwaves. Older viewers, his main audience, were tired of the shouting and accusations, but at the same time, they couldn't look away. Jimmy knew that if Stallone started a heated political rant, it could either tank the ratings or drown the show in scandal. But something about it intrigued him. He put the coffee down and headed toward the hallway. In the narrow corridor behind the stage stood Sylvester Stallone, tall, with gray at his temples, but still with that signature tension in his shoulders, as if ready for a fight. In front of him, young writer Eric, nervously gesturing, held the interview plan in his hands. "I'm not going to sit here and tell stupid jokes about Rocky or Rambo, got it?" Stallone's voice was low, but sharp like a punch. "People need to know that veterans are living on the streets, while politicians throw money at their campaigns. You want me to stay quiet about that?" Eric, a skinny guy with a trendy beard, tried to hold his ground. "But, Sylvester, this is an entertainment show. We can't just throw the audience into a debate about Congress. Jimmy will make a joke, you tell a couple of stories from a set, and everyone will be happy." "Happy?" Stallone stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. "You know how many of my friends from Vietnam still don't have a roof over their heads? And you want me to laugh and wave it off?" Jimmy stopped a few steps away, feeling the tension in the air thicken. He noticed a few assistants peeking around the corner, whispering. The smell of coffee from the machine mixed with a faint scent of disinfectant. The studio always smelled like this before the show, but this time, the atmosphere was different. Jimmy felt his heart race. This wasn't just a conflict. It was a moment that could change everything. "Sly," Jimmy said quietly but confidently, stepping closer. "What's going on?" Stallone spun around sharply, his gaze flaring, but then softened a bit when he recognized the host. "Jimmy, I didn't come here to play the clown," he said, holding back his anger. "I agreed to this interview because I thought you weren't afraid to talk about the real stuff. But your guy here wants me to shut up and dance to your tune." Eric blushed and tried to argue. "I didn't say shut up, I just—" "Enough, Eric." Jimmy raised his hand, not taking his eyes off Stallone. "Sly, I get it. You want to say something important. But if we start with politics, half the people will turn off the TV in 5 seconds. Let's do this differently." "Differently?" Stallone grimaced. "You want to polish it up to fit your format?" "I'm not selling out, Jimmy." "I'm not asking you to sell out," Jimmy replied, his voice calm, but with a steel edge. "I'm asking you to trust me. We'll get to what you want to say, but in a way that people will listen, not run away." Stallone fell silent, staring at Jimmy. The hallway was still, the only sound the distant hum of the air conditioner. Jimmy felt sweat bead on his palms. He knew Stallone wasn't just a star, he was a man of principles. And if he walked now, it would be a disaster. But something in the actor's gaze, a mix of anger and pain, struck a chord with Jimmy. He remembered his Uncle Frank, a Korean War veteran, who fought bureaucratic battles for his pension until the end of his life. Maybe Sly was right? "All right," Stallone finally said, exhaling. "But if you try to fool me, I'll get up and walk out right in the middle of the show." "Deal," Jimmy nodded, feeling the adrenaline pumping in his veins. "Let's go. We have 20 minutes until the show starts." They walked toward the studio, But the tension didn't fade. Jimmy heard Eric whispering to an assistant behind him, "This is going to be a disaster." In his mind, the host was running through options. How to steer the conversation in the right direction without losing the audience or the guest. He knew the older viewers who watched his show wanted not just laughter, but truth, but not shouting. And here, in this narrow hallway, something bigger than just an interview was beginning. The Jimmy Kimmel Live studio was filled with the usual pre-show buzz. Technicians were checking microphones, the lights were blinding, and the hum of the audience behind the curtain sounded like a swarm of bees. Jimmy stood backstage, adjusting his tie, casting quick glances at Sylvester Stallone, who sat in the guest chair, arms crossed. The actor looked like a statue, unwavering, with tightly pressed lips. His dark gray suit contrasted with the bright stage decor, and there was a determination in his eyes that made Jimmy even more nervous. 5 minutes to air, the director shouted, and the team began to bustle. Jimmy felt his palms grow sweaty. He knew this wasn't just an interview. It was a chance to either hit the jackpot or become a laughingstock on the evening news. The phrase Stallone had said kept turning in his mind. "If you try to fool me, I'm out." Jimmy had to figure out how to conduct the show in a way that allowed Sly to speak his mind, but without making the audience feel attacked. The theme music played, the audience erupted in applause, and Jimmy walked out onto the stage with his signature smile. Bright spotlights hit his face. The smell of floor polish mingled with the perfume from the front row. He started with a light joke about traffic in Los Angeles, and the crowd laughed, a good sign. But when he announced the guest, the audience buzzed louder. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we have a legend, a man who taught us that it's never too late to rise from a knockout, Sylvester Stallone." Stallone stepped out to a roaring ovation, waved, and sat down, but his smile was tight. Jimmy felt his stomach tighten. He began with a safe question. "Sly, your new movie The Last Fight is incredible. Tell us how you prepared for the role of a veteran." Stallone nodded, but his response quickly veered off script. "You know, Jimmy, I didn't just prepare. I lived with these guys, veterans who came back from Iraq, Afghanistan. They told me how the government abandons them. I couldn't just play this, I felt it." The room fell silent. Jimmy could feel the mood shift. The audience was listening, but the tension was growing. He tried to steer the conversation back. "That's impressive. And you really poured your soul into this role. But how was it on set? Any funny stories?" Stallone furrowed his brow, his voice growing firmer. "A funny story? Jimmy, I don't want to tell tales. While we're here laughing, veterans are sleeping on cardboard under bridges. Did you know there are 50,000 homeless people in Los Angeles, half of whom served? Why aren't we talking about that?" Whispers rippled through the crowd. Some clapped, others awkwardly turned their gaze away. Jimmy saw the director waving his hands behind the camera, change the subject signal. But he knew that if he cut Sly off now, he'd walk. He had to tread carefully. "Sly, I agree it's a serious issue," Jimmy said, keeping his voice calm. "But let's break this down. You say the government is abandoning them. What exactly did you see that moved you so much?" Stallone leaned forward, his eyes flashing. "I saw a guy, 62 years old, no leg, begging outside a supermarket in Santa Monica. He told me he'd been waiting 2 years for a prosthetic because the Veterans Department had no money. And then I read that Congress is allocating billions for some ridiculous projects. It's unfair, Jimmy." The room buzzed louder, applause mixed with shouts of agreement. Jimmy felt his pulse quicken. He knew the 55-plus crowd was locked in. This was their issue, their anger. But he also knew the show was walking a fine line, a little more, and it would turn into a political rally instead of entertainment. "This sounds like something that really needs attention," Jimmy said, carefully choosing his words. "But tell me, Sly, why do you think people don't talk about this more? Why are we here joking around instead of solving the problem?" Stallone exhaled, his shoulders dropping a bit. "Because it's easier to laugh than to face the truth. But I can't stay silent. I've seen my friends suffer, and I won't let them just be forgotten. Jimmy nodded, feeling a plan start to form in his head. He couldn't let everything go unchecked, but he didn't want to shut down Sly either. He needed to take control of the show, but in a way that made the guest feel heard. You know what, Sly? You're right, we can't ignore this. Let's do this. Let's talk about your movie, but I promise we'll come back to this. And not just talk about it, I want you to tell us what we can do. Deal? Stallone looked at him, as if weighing his words. Then he nodded slowly. Deal. But you better keep your word, Jimmy. Always, Jimmy smiled, though inside he could feel his nerves trembling. The cameras switched to a close-up, and Jimmy returned to jokes about the last fight's filming. The audience laughed when Sly told a story about accidentally breaking a prop chair, but the tension hadn't vanished. Jimmy could see the audience whispering, the operators casting nervous glances at the director. He knew this wasn't over. Sly was waiting for his moment, and Jimmy had to figure out how to turn this explosive moment into something bigger than just a scandal. Backstage, Carol ran up to the assistant. What's he doing? If this airs without control, we'll be torn apart on Twitter. He knows what he's doing, the assistant replied, though his voice was trembling. Jimmy heard all of this through his earpiece and clenched his fists. He wasn't sure if he knew what he was doing, but he felt this interview could either be his triumph or his downfall. And most importantly, he didn't want to let Sly down. Would he find the balance? What would happen when they returned to the veterans issue? Everything depended on the next few minutes. The musical intro played again, signaling the return from the commercial break. Jimmy Kimmel sat at his desk, holding a pen with which he nervously tapped on the wooden surface. The spotlight reflected off his glasses, and a tense silence hung in the air. Viewers could sense that the show had gone off script. Sylvester Stallone sat opposite him, his hands resting on the armrests of his chair, his gaze fixed on Jimmy. A faint smell of coffee from the dressing room and a metallic taste of adrenaline filled the studio, felt by everyone present. Jimmy took a deep breath and turned to the audience with a slight smile. So, we were just talking to Sly about his new movie, The Last Fight, but as you've heard, he has something much more important on his mind. And I promised we'd get back to it. Sly, the floor is yours. The cameras zoomed in on Stallone. He straightened up, his voice becoming deeper, yet calmer than before. I've already said, Jimmy, that veterans in this country are being left behind. And I'm not just here to complain. I want people to understand. These men and women gave everything, and we're turning our backs on them. I started a foundation 5 years ago, The Last Stand. We help veterans with housing, healthcare, jobs. But it's not enough. We need support. The audience erupted in applause, and Jimmy felt his heart relax a bit. He knew Sly had just thrown him a challenge, not just to talk, but to do something. And then it hit him. He leaned forward, his eyes lit up. Sly, this is incredible. And you know what? I don't want this to just be words on air. Let's do something right now. We have an audience, here and at home. What if we raise funds for your foundation? Right now. Stallone raised his eyebrows in surprise, but then smiled, a genuine smile, for the first time that evening. Are you serious, Jimmy? Absolutely, Jimmy replied, turning to the camera. Here's what we're going to do. Everyone watching right now, go to the Last Stand website. We'll put the link on the screen. Every dollar you donate in the next hour, I'll match out of my own pocket. Up to $50,000. How does that sound, Sly? The room erupted in applause, people jumping to their feet. Stallone laughed, a hoarse, genuine laugh that eased the tension. You're clever, Kimmel. But I'm in. Jimmy felt a wave of euphoria wash over him. He saw the operators smiling, the director backstage giving a thumbs up. But most importantly, he saw the spark in Stallone's eyes. This wasn't just a TV moment, it was something real. All right, but that's not all, Jimmy added, improvising on the spot. Sly, you said veterans deserve to be heard. Let's give them a voice. We have a phone line. If there are veterans in our audience, call in. Tell us your story. We're listening. The first call came in a minute. The voice on the other end trembled, but was filled with strength. My name's Tom Reed. I'm 67. I served in Vietnam. 2 years ago, I lost my home because I couldn't pay my mortgage due to medical bills. Slice Foundation helped me find an apartment. I just want to say, thank you. Stallone pressed his lips together, his eyes welling up. He stood and firmly shook Jimmy's hand across the table. This is why we're doing this, he said quietly. The next 20 minutes turned into something unprecedented. Calls came in one after another. A veteran from Texas who had fought for his pension for years. A woman from California talking about how her son returned from Afghanistan with PTSD and didn't receive help. The audience cried and clapped, while on the screen the numbers rolled. Donations surpassed $100,000 before the show ended. Jimmy announced that he was doubling up to $75,000, and the crowd went wild. As the show was wrapping up, Jimmy turned to Stallone. Sly, I don't know what you planned when you came here, but I'm glad you didn't dance to my tune. Stallone smiled warmly this time. And I'm glad you kept your word, Jimmy. And that you didn't just laugh. The closing music played, and the cameras pulled back, showing the standing and applauding audience. Jimmy felt warmth spreading in his chest. He saw tears on the faces of the viewers, people 55 plus who might have known veterans or felt that injustice. Backstage, Carol ran up to him, her eyes sparkling. Jimmy, this was the best show in history. Twitter's blowing up. They're calling it the interview of the decade. But Jimmy wasn't thinking about ratings. He looked at Stallone, who was quietly talking to his assistant about how to distribute the collected funds. This wasn't just a TV success. It was a moment when words turned into action. When the studio emptied, Jimmy stepped outside. The cool night air of Los Angeles mixed with the scent of jasmine from a nearby park. He looked up at the stars, barely visible through the city lights, and thought, maybe this is just the beginning. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, whether they would change the system or if it would remain just a drop in the ocean. But today, they made people listen. And that was enough.